everyone, so today I'm going to be presenting my research project which is on sustainability and textiles, talking about how the industry can be more sustainable in the future and why it's not so sustainable currently. I wanted to start this project out by looking at the different kinds of fabric that are used in the industry and how they affect the environment, and then going into how chemical usage can be more sustainable and how it is hurting the environment currently. There's a lot of fabrics out there that it felt almost overwhelming to pick just some of them. However, I thought about the most popular ones. If you looked at your clothing tags, which ones would you most likely see? And then as I continued on, I found some other research papers that were talking about similar fabrics, so I kind of narrowed it down. The fabrics I'm going to be talking about are cotton, acrylic, polyester, nylon, hemp, linen, rayon, and tencel. Obviously there's a lot more, and there's also a lot more new sustainable fabrics, but I wanted to focus solely on ones that were really popular in the marketplace or gaining in popularity. So to start with, I wanted to talk about cotton, which seems like the biggest fabric. When you think about it, I think of cotton and I think of polyester. Cotton has been in the industry for years as an industry standard, and that's because it creates comfortable, durable, breathable clothing, and it's been farmed for years. So it is, people know how to farm it. It's easy to farm relatively, and because of the popularity that it has generated, it has resulted in genetically modified seeds. These seeds can last in weather in all different kinds of seasons, and it can now be grown in off seasons, and it can be grown in a variety of different countries. And from there, I wanted to look at cotton and the negative impacts of cotton, because there are a lot of impacts of cotton that are hurting the environment. Start with, to farm cotton, it needs a lot of water. The crops are very water dependent, and if you're wearing a white t-shirt, most likely it'll take around 3,000 gallons of water to farm that cotton that will make that t-shirt. And for jeans, it'll be anywhere between 10,000 and 20,000 gallons. So this is sadly a result of the genetically modified crop. It requires a lot more water, and also it requires a lot more pesticides, fertilizers, which is the reason why the cotton is such a heavy chemical user. So if you look at all the fabrics that are used in the marketplace, in terms of chemical usage, one of the top ones that if you look at people's research papers, you'll find that cotton is the one that's talked about most often, just because of the heavy pesticide, insecticide usage, and fertilizers as well. However, the genetically modified crop, the biggest plus that has come out of it is that it yields so much more. So as the population is growing, you're going to need more clothing to clothe the population. And because cotton is so popular, people love the feel of it. If you have a cotton t-shirt, most likely it'll feel nicer than polyester, acrylic, synthetic fibers, and that's the reason for its popularity. This sadly results in more fertilizers, more chemicals, and those chemicals, when the crops are harvested, it will drain nutrients from the soil. This is shown when I was researching it. This was shown in a 2013 United Nations Environmental Program report, and it reported a decrease in Mali's annual agricultural GDP per habitat by 50%. So, I mean, it comes at a cost, and that as you add more chemicals and more genetically modified seeds, you're going to come out with nutrient deprived soil. And in order to combat that and make sure that those farmers can continue growing cotton, which is a cash crop, they'll need to add more chemicals. So it becomes kind of a paradigm in how to solve it. One of the things that people have gone back to as a way to solve this problem is going back to organic cotton. Organic cotton doesn't require all the heavy insecticide and pesticide usage. It doesn't require all the fertilizers. It's basically going back to how it was grown in the past. This is great for soil fertility and it requires less water. However, the big drawback is that it requires a lot more land because the yield is so much smaller. And with cotton being so popular, it's really hard to grow enough cotton with just organic cotton. So while it's better for the environment, it takes up more land. So it brings up the question of what would be the best solution environmentally, because while it doesn't have the chemical aspects, it's taking up more land that could be used for the population. It could be used for farming actual food that is needed, and a lot of times organic cotton is grown in rural areas. So while the environment's better, those people might be better off farming food. Other than that, a lot less chemicals, so obviously that's better. However, because it is not genetically modified, the cotton itself does not take dye as easily. So, and the dyeing process is already chemically heavy as in general. And so when you are trying to dye it, you're going to have to use harsher chemicals. So a white t-shirt, or even a white t-shirt, will require some bleaching. So I mean, there's still chemicals involved, but there's not as much chemical usage in the cultivation process. So going into some very chemically heavy fabrics, I wanted to talk about next about synthetic fibers. So those are man-made fibers, plastic fibers, and I'm going to be talking about three big ones, which are acrylic, polyester, and nylon. I'm going to start off with acrylic. The fibers are made of polyacrylonitrile, something like that. Anyways, it's hard to say. It's a plastic. It's just a soft plastic. And the way that the fibers are made is that the fibers are heated up really heavily and then they're cooled with vast amounts of water. And I'll get more into that in terms of energy usage and CO2 emissions later on in the paper. But that's just kind of laying the groundwork for that. And despite the fast production process, the chemicals it requires creates long-lasting effects and consequences on the environment. So the reason why synthetic fibers are so popular is that they're relatively cheap to make because you don't have to cultivate them. There's no farming and land use needed except for factories. And it is, I think I've gone over them, cheap, no land, and it's pretty easy to produce. Those are the three. And another synthetic fiber, these are all kind of in the same realm, fibers, so I mean it's going to be a lot quicker to go through. The next one is polyester. It's cheap, it's versatile, it's very popular. If you look at your t-shirt, a lot of the time if it's cheaper t-shirt, if it's from fast fashion, it'll probably be polyester. And while there is high quality polyester on the market that can last for years, like up to 10 years at least, chances are the polyester you're wearing is not expensive polyester, and your polyester is made to last for about 2 years, up to 2 years really, and that is to meet the demands of fast fashion. Fast fashion requires the next big stylish trend to be the thing that they want people to buy, and because of that, they don't want you to buy things for 2 years. They want you to buy it for 3 months. And that's kind of the rise of no fashion seasons, whereas in the past there's been fall, winter, spring. Now there's a season every week, pretty much. So why would they want it to last longer? And the last fabric is nylon. It's stretchy, it's durable. If you think about it, most of the time I think of tights for women as the classic example for nylon usage. It's plastic derived from crude oil, and then it's created in a high heat chemical reaction called condensation polymerization. The process requires high heated temperatures, vast amounts of water, similar to polyester and all the other ones. So all three of these fabrics are incredibly harmful to the environment. They emit gas nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas 300 times more potent than CO2. So obviously they're a big reason for the environmental impact from the fashion industry. They also are not biodegradable. So sadly, once they're thrown out, they're stuck in landfills, and they currently make up about 63% of the fibers in the textile market. So over half of fibers in the textile market will be synthetic, which is why I think that going forward, a big thing that the industry should think about is recycling synthetic fibers instead of creating more. Of course, I've thought about this, and reports talk about how even if you recycle these fibers, it will create pollution. However, it is better than getting more fuel out of the ground, and it's better to just use the acrylic fibers that are already out in the marketplace and getting them out of landfills and back into consumers' hands, hopefully as a nicer made product that can be worn for years instead of simply thrown out. Of course, that would have to have a complete difference in the consumer mindset. So then I talked about hemp and linen. Both are really great fibers because they are insect resistant, so they don't require as much chemicals. Linen is an awesome choice, except for when it is dyed, which sadly it is often dyed in the marketplace. But if you just buy linen that is tan, gray, ivory, and not white, because the white requires heavy bleaching. If you buy any of the natural colors, it will be completely biodegradable. And it requires less land than cotton, requires less water than cotton, and it's just overall a great alternative, especially when it's not dyed. And hemp, it's durable, it's warm, it's soft. It kind of gets, I think people kind of associate it with like cannabis, but in reality, the fabric is perfectly great, and it has nothing to do with cannabis really, in terms of the fabric, the wearable product. It requires no pesticides, like I said before, and one of the greatest things about hemp is that when it's harvested, it keeps the nutrients in the soil, so you don't have to add any more chemicals or add any nutrients back into the soil. Some companies add chemicals to speed up the growth and the yield numbers, but that will hopefully phase out as companies are trying to actually be sustainable and using hemp sustainably. But right now it does fall on the consumers to look up the company that they're buying hemp clothing from if they're trying to be sustainable, and actually checking to make sure those companies are certified in growing hemp sustainably and not adding chemicals. Quickly, wool and recycled wool. I wanted to talk about wool just because I think I didn't mention it earlier, but I wanted to talk about wool because it is animal-made fiber, which is a really interesting difference compared to plants and the cultivation of plants and synthetics, and that wool would be a great choice to replace synthetic fibers specifically for outerwear. Because it is on the backs of sheep, it's made to withstand the elements, it's wrinkle resistant, and there's no microfiber shedding as with plastic made fibers. It also takes no crops, and the sheep are usually grazing on non-arable land, so it wouldn't be like there could be farming there anyways. However, the big kicker is that the sheep produce methane, and that's a very powerful greenhouse gas that is not good for the environment. And in looking in statistics for CO2 and emissions, wool really stacks up in greenhouse gas emissions because of the methane production. So I think going forward, there's already a lot of wool in the market. There are a bunch of probably old sweaters that are in thrift stores right now, and I think that a great alternative would be to take those in, take them apart, respin the yarn, and recycle them and repurpose them for an entirely new generation. There are already companies doing this, and I think that the best way to use wool and if we can increase the popularity of wool to people who want to wear wool clothing, would be to recycle wool. And lastly, I wanted to talk about something really new and innovative, and that is Tencel versus rayon. Rayon is currently used in the market, and it is an artificial fiber made of wood pulp. The fiber creation takes a lot of trees. It results in deforestation. It takes chemicals such as caustic soda and sulfuric acid. It's really bad for the environment. However, Tencel has been created as a sustainable alternative. It is a closed loop system. Tencel is the name of the company, and they named their fabric Tencel as well, but the Tencel fabric is a company in particular, and it is basically a lyocell or modal fabric, which means it's made out of wood pulp. So there are other companies doing it, and they're lyocell modal fabrics. But I focused on Tencel because it's the most popular. It's easily compostable, it's easily recyclable, and the company itself recycles water and reuses the solvent at a rate more than 99%. It also has, the fabric is easily compostable because it can be transformed into cellulosic fibers with high resource efficiency and low environmental impact. So it's great, basically. It's a great alternative and it's gaining popularity. The big negative is that it's expensive. And so it brings up this question of, are we pricing out people from shopping sustainably if they don't want to thrift? If they do want to buy new products, they can no longer afford sustainable clothing, which is really sad and is a whole nother issue in itself. That could be a whole nother research paper. So to kind of wrap all these fibers up, you think about the chemical usage, and overall, I really wanted to get into like the chemicals, the chemical processing of it, and learn about like waterway treatment and stuff like that. But it really, when I learned about it, when I was trying to research it, I found that a lot of the ways that they were trying to treat wastewater chemicals in a runoff were really inefficient. The three main ways are physical, chemical, and biological. But they're usually expensive, they're usually inefficient. So that has led to more people wanting to look at the way the dyes are made and change the ways the dyes are made. And one really cool way is there's a treatment called Color Zen, and it you add it to cotton that has just been harvested at the very beginning, right after it's been harvested, and by adding this Color Zen to it, it makes the dyeing process faster. It uses 90% less water, 75% less energy, and 90% less auxiliary chemicals. So that's just a big innovative new way. Sorry, I just bumped the table. And another great way that's kind of gaining popularity is digital printing. And in 2018, it saved 40 billion liters of water worldwide. So that is because it doesn't require as much water to wash out the dye as natural dye, because you have to rinse the fabric, you dye it, you rinse it, and you have to rinse it multiple times to make sure there's no excess dye, because you're advertising to customers and then you tell them they shouldn't worry. If they put it in their washing machine, it shouldn't dye anything. So you really need to make sure the dye is washed out, and that's why so much water is used in the industry. So energy usage is tied heavily to CO2 emissions. It's not surprisingly, acrylics put out the most CO2. Behind acrylics, it's going to be cotton, and then all the organic fibers put out less CO2. They also require less energy. So it kind of, it relates really heavily. A lot of it has to do with synthetics being heated up. It takes a lot of energy to heat them up, and it takes a lot of water to cool them down. So that's why it takes so much more energy. And then cotton takes a lot of energy and then produces a lot of CO2 in the process of cotton, but then also getting rid of the remains, the stuff that isn't used, the chemicals, it all kind of coincides into carbon dioxide emissions. So, I talked a lot about how Tencel is really sustainable, and this coincides to Tencel being a less energy consumer. It does not need as much energy to be produced as some of the other ways, specifically rayon, because Tencel is kind of taking over the place of rayon, at least hopefully in the future will completely take over the place of rayon, and it requires so much less energy, so it just seems like a no-brainer except for the expense part. So lastly, that kind of sums it up. I wrote a whole paragraph about basically what I've already talked about, but that is that synthetics produce a lot of carbon dioxide. Cotton is not good for the environment. It also produces a lot of carbon dioxide. It uses a lot of energy, and both of these two put a lot of chemicals in the water. Linen is a great, hopefully we can bring linen back into this, into this age. I wear linen clothing, but I don't feel like I wear enough of it, and considering how good it is for the environment, it's a shame that it isn't used more, but it is not as easy to produce. And for fast fashion, it just is not an option for them. And for good reason. It wouldn't be smart to use linen or hemp in fast fashion, and that seems to be what the industry is focused on until now. And I heard a statistic the other day, this is not in my paper, it's not looked up, but that around 83% of young people care about sustainability being in the mission for their clothing. And that around 70%, something like that, would change their shopping ways to fit a more sustainable company. So I think that's really exciting. Hopefully that will move companies into going back to more organic crops as kind of a percentage, but not most of it. Hopefully that going forward the industry will look to more productive ways of creating fabric, such as tencel. Science is moving forward, moving fast, and hopefully those new fabrics that are created more sustainably will be in the future. It'll be used more in the future. At least I hope so. Oh, one other really interesting fact, as I'm kind of making sure I cover everything from this paper, is that one of the statistics I found is that cotton, non-organic cotton, GMO cotton, uses 6% of pesticides and 16% of insecticides in the world. So just a crazy percentage just for cotton that we wear in our clothing all the time. And it really makes you wonder, like, how much of this is good for our bodies to be wearing clothing that it was just doused in chemicals when it was made. Anyway, that's pretty much the end of my paper. The conclusion being that hopefully the future of the textile industry will be tied with sustainability, and hopefully some of the fabrics that I talked about being sustainable will be the #1 choice going forward for companies. Hopefully more sustainable companies will pop up and become popular, and hopefully we will pivot away from chemically toxic fibers such as synthetics and nutrient draining and water hungry cotton. But anyways, I hope you guys all enjoyed this. I hope you learned something, and maybe you can look at the tags on your clothing and maybe you have more of an idea of where it came from. But anyways, thank you, and everyone have a great day.